We've all made mistakes while riding, and when we look back on how we first got into it, I'm sure there are many things that many of us would change if we could go back. Looking back on the last few years, there are many things I want to do differently and things I've learned, and maybe I can share some of those things with some people just getting into riding. Things like gear, the different types of motorcycles, the different sizes of motorcycles, as well as just simple things to know and consider when getting into the sport. Very first thing I want to consider is gear and the type of gear that I wear during the summertime. It does get hot here in Wisconsin, even though right now it's unbearable to be outside. The biggest thing is the humidity level here is astronomical. It is very, very wet here in the summertime, and you sweat profusely. One of the biggest mistakes that I made was the fact that I had a black jacket and a black helmet. This year, not only do I want to get a white or preferably a gray jacket, I also want to get a lightweight, breathable jacket. In the past, I've worn leather and a heavier riding jacket, and both of those, well, they don't breathe very well, even though they are very protective. If I'm going on a longer ride, perhaps something that's a little bit more risky, whether it's traffic, whether I want to go at some higher speeds, I'd probably put the leather or my proper riding jacket back on. But getting a lightweight armor jacket, I think, would be a absolute game changer when it comes to it, because every time I get off of my motorcycles in the summer, especially with my big riding jacket, I am drenched in sweat. If you don't have the proper riding gear and the days it gets really hot up here or the days it gets really cold up here but it's still rideable, you want to make sure you have the proper gear, and that's a mistake that I made last year that I want to change this year. Not only that, but I also want to upgrade my helmet system in the years. I've always, for the most part, worn a helmet. That's something very important, so if you don't wear a helmet, that's probably a mistake you should change very quickly. The other thing I started to do last year, and something that I wish I had done earlier, but I still didn't mess anything up, was the fact that I started to protect my hearing. I started to wear earplugs last year, which made a game-changing difference. Last year I rode more than any year that I had ever rode, and on top of that, I rode at faster speeds. The biggest thing about when it comes to riding is the wind noise. The wind can really damage your hearing, and even if you're wearing a helmet, it's great to wear earplugs. With earplugs or proper ear protection, you'll still be able to hear your bike, but it definitely cancels out a ton of wind noise and it brings the decibel levels way down, which protects your hearing. Hearing protection, in my opinion, is a must when you're going out for a proper ride. Moving away from gear, let's get into the most important topic of this, and that is the motorcycle. I started off on a Buell XB12R. It's a 1200. It's the first ever motorcycle I rode when I was 17 years old. The bike is a handful. Over 108 horsepower, a ton of torque, a V-twin. The XB12R is not an easy bike to ride, even coming from someone who now has a few years under his belt. The mistake I made wasn't hopping onto the bike because it was too much for my skill level, but it was hopping onto that bike and not trying some smaller stuff out first. Now this next point is a pretty big point, but over 40% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. So please go down, click the subscribe button, because it greatly helps the channel out. It helps me make more videos like this and helps YouTube promote these videos to more riders. I would say about 90% of people should not be hopping on a bike like that. I would say that I am in the 10% exception. There are some people who struggle a lot with motorcycles and riding and the coordination factor of it, and there are some people who should never step onto a motorcycle. And the large majority of people need a couple of months of riding before they can hop on a machine like that. I've been fortunate enough to, before that, have hundreds of miles of riding two-wheeled motorized vehicles, and then on top of that, having thousands of miles on high horsepower manual cars. Now, putting those two things together doesn't mean that you can hop onto a leader bike as your first bike, but as someone who picked it up very quickly, picked riding up very quickly, I was able to handle that bike. The mistake that I made was hopping onto that bike, because when I got onto some smaller CC bikes, the learning curve becomes a lot easier. Now, when I got onto some smaller machines, it became very apparent to me that I was lacking in some fundamentals, which I would have picked up eventually with the Buell, like getting it really far into corners, emergency braking, emergency stopping, without being scared of the weight of the bike and the horsepower it possesses. Having a more lightweight bike that's way more confidence inspiring took my riding to the next level, and I was able to become a way better rider much faster on a smaller machine. For that 5 to 10% that is able to do that, your riding ability will transcend when you hop onto a smaller bike. Not only will the fundamentals become way more easier, but riding just becomes way more fun with a lighter bike, especially in your early couple seasons of riding. Nowadays I still have fun on my 200, my 500s, my smaller displacement machines, as well as my leader bike, and still the 1200. Now the next mistake that I made a couple of times, but also a mistake that a ton of new riders make, is going too fast. And I'm not talking about going too fast as far as in actual speed, but going too fast in your head. Whether you're trying to leave a stop sign, whether you're trying to park your bike up, if you take an extra second to just look around, think about your surroundings, but not only that, think about your machine, think about the clutch, think about how you're leaving the stop. Because it's very easy, and it happens to all of us, we're all going to stall a motorcycle at some point. But if you're new and you're a little bit uncomfortable as far as what a motorcycle does, if you do snuff a bike out, you might end up dropping it because you freak out. But if you took an extra second to just calm down, to have a clear head, and to think about the situation you're in and all of the possibilities that could happen, you'll be very quick to react on your feet. And even if you do end up stalling the machine, you can pull the clutch in right away, and you can firmly plant your position on the road and not spill it over because of a silly mistake you made. Same thing goes for parking a machine. Take an extra second to look at where your bike is actually being parked, take an extra second to make sure your kickstand is down. It's gonna happen, things happen, mistakes happen, even with seasoned riders. But just having a calm head and taking an extra second to just think can save yourself from a lot of situations. Now, of course, when you're riding, you need to make split-second decisions, but this also helps when you're trying to make that split-second decision, because hopefully you were able to calculate that happening. Now, another mistake that I made but corrected very quickly is changing out your brake fluid and your oils on time. Brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs water. Every other year, you should be changing your brake fluid out. Brakes are very important, and if you have disc brakes, change the fluid. This is a lesson that I'm going to take into this year basically by heart. There are many bikes that have gone 5+ years without brake fluid changes that work completely fine. But it is smarter and a better idea to actually do the proper maintenance, take a second before properly taking the motorcycle out and changing the things. Also, every 5 to 6 years, consider changing your tires out. You probably should change them out sooner than that. Some people say 3 to 4 years for motorcycle tires. It really depends how they were kept, but I don't recommend you go over a 6-year period without changing your tires if you're seriously riding a machine. I've been guilty of this. Some of my older vintage bikes do have some older tires on them, and I don't get them out too many times in a year, so I've been a little neglectful of that. I am very cognizant of the motorcycles that I am seriously riding, of the tire life, condition, and anything that is going on with that. Safety is huge, and even with those vintage bikes, I definitely need to be more on top of it, and that's another goal I have going into this year. And the final mistake I made was not getting into some of the newer bikes, not experiencing what some of the newer bikes have to offer. A huge part of that is the cost, but not only that, I haven't even gone out to too many dealerships and looked at bikes and made any type of connections in the newer motorcycle world. Not only newer bikes, but also trying to get on some trails and stuff. I just haven't been into that world at all, and I think that's a huge part of motorcycling that I've missed. If you've made some mistakes while riding that I didn't cover in this video, leave them down in the comment section down below. Perhaps I'll learn something, or the other riders that are watching this can learn a thing or two. With all of that being said, if you did enjoy, leave me a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.